Am I wrong for not telling my parents that the event they missed was my wedding? Brace yourselves, this is a long and complicated story, but I need to get it all out. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and my younger brother, Mike, is 21. Mike has always been what you'd call a man-child. He's the kind of person who expects the world to revolve around him, never taking responsibility for his actions, and constantly whining and complaining whenever things don't go his way. To make matters worse, he's a complete mama's boy. My mom dotes on him to an extreme degree, and it's been that way since the day he was born. Now, to be clear, Mike didn't have any special circumstances that would warrant this level of attention. There were no complications during his birth, no health issues, nothing. He was just born, and suddenly, my parents, especially my mom, shifted all their attention and affection onto him, as if I didn't exist. It was like I went from being their beloved daughter to being a distant memory overnight. My mom, who is 50 years old, transformed from a loving and caring mother into one of those boy moms you see people mocking online. She lives and breathes for Mike, and her entire identity seems to be wrapped up in being his mother. She's the kind of mom who constantly brags about her son's achievements, no matter how small or insignificant, while completely ignoring anything I accomplished. It's as if nothing I do matters in comparison to Mike. My dad, also 50, is a bit different. He still showed me love and support growing up, but he's always been too passive, too much of a coward, to stand up to my mom. He never once intervened when she favored Mike over me, never once told her she was being unfair, and never once allowed me to have even a small victory in the endless battle for their attention. He was always content to sit on the sidelines, letting my mom have her way, no matter how much it hurt me. The only person who ever stood up for me was my grandpa. He's 76 now and has always been the one to call out my parents on their nonsense. He never liked how they treated me compared to Mike, and he's never been shy about saying so. My grandpa has always had a soft spot for me, partly because I remind him of my late grandmother, his wife. He's told me many times how much I remind him of her, her kindness, her strength, her resilience. We have a very special bond because of that. Unfortunately, Grandpa lives on the other side of the country, so I don't get to see him as often as I'd like. But even from afar, he's been my biggest supporter. Mike, of course, knows full well how much our mom favors him, and he takes every opportunity to shove it in my face. He's always been this way, arrogant, entitled, and just generally unpleasant. We've never gotten along, and it's not hard to see why. He's spoiled rotten, and he's always been a brat. He's the type of person who would frame me for something just to get me in trouble, and my parents, especially my mom, would believe him without question. I can't even count how many times I was punished for things I didn't do, simply because Mike was better at playing the victim. The only thing Mike has ever truly excelled at is football. He's good enough that he earned a scholarship to a prestigious out-of-state college, and that's where all my parents' energy and resources have gone. When it came time for me to go to college, I was told that my college fund had been used to cover expenses after a fire. But I later discovered that the money had actually been given to Mike, to buy him a car and help him get a house. My parents didn't spend a single dime on my education. They didn't even bother to apologize or explain why they did it, they just acted like it was perfectly normal. Despite all of this, I managed to get into a public university. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to make something of myself without their help. That's where I met Lucas. From the moment we met, there was something about him that drew me in. He was kind, supportive, and genuinely interested in me as a person. He became my best friend, and over the years, that friendship blossomed into something more. Lucas and my college friends became my lifeline, helping me navigate the challenges of school and family. They were there for me when my parents weren't, and with their support, I eventually moved out of my parents' house. Fast forward to today, both Lucas and I have established ourselves in our careers, and we're doing well financially. About a year ago, Lucas proposed to me. It was the happiest moment of my life. We're both private people, so we didn't make a big announcement or post about it on social media. Instead, I decided to share the news with my parents in person. But when I told them about the engagement, they barely reacted. All I got was a dismissive, "That's nice." It felt like they didn't even hear me, like my happiness didn't matter to them. Despite their indifference, Lucas and I started planning our wedding. We wanted something simple and intimate, surrounded by our closest friends and family. Lucas, always the optimist, convinced me to invite my parents and brother, even though I had serious doubts about whether they would care enough to show up. So, we sent them an invitation. Weeks went by, and we never received a response from them. I visited them a few times, hoping to talk about the wedding and maybe gauge their interest. But every time I brought it up, without explicitly mentioning it was a wedding, my mom would interrupt me, steering the conversation back to Mike and whatever he was doing. It was like she couldn't be bothered to listen to anything that didn't involve him. There was a moment in my life when I could no longer tolerate the constant preferential treatment my brother received from our parents. This had been building up for years, as I had watched them consistently prioritize his activities and milestones over mine. I finally reached my breaking point during a casual conversation with my mother. We were discussing various things, and I decided to bring up an important event that I was planning. The date for this event was fixed, there was no way it could be changed. I was hoping that this time, my parents would prioritize me. However, as soon as I mentioned the date, my mother immediately responded that they couldn't attend because my brother had his final game of the season on the same day. She made it clear that they had to be there to support him. Her response didn't shock me, it was just another example of the ongoing favoritism I had experienced throughout my life. They had missed my ballet recitals, which I had practiced for months, my theater performances, where I had leading roles, and even my high school and university graduations. All these significant moments in my life had been overshadowed by my brother's events. It felt like I was always second best, an afterthought in my own family. But this time, I couldn't just let it go. The frustration and hurt that had been building up inside me finally boiled over. In a moment of pettiness, I decided to withhold the crucial detail that this event I was planning was actually my wedding. I calmly told my parents that it was no problem if they couldn't attend, and I didn't press the issue further. Deep down, I wanted them to realize on their own what they were missing, but I knew they wouldn't. They never did. A few weeks later, I got married. The wedding was everything I had ever dreamed of, intimate, joyful, and surrounded by the people who truly cared about me. Lucas, my husband, was by my side, as were our closest friends and family. My grandfather, who had always been a guiding force in my life, was beaming with pride as he walked me down the aisle. The ceremony was beautiful, the reception was lively, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace. However, amid all the happiness, there was a noticeable absence. My parents weren't there. During the reception, several of my relatives approached me, puzzled as to why my parents hadn't shown up. They were curious, and a few were even concerned. I didn't sugarcoat it, I simply told them the truth. My parents had chosen to attend my brother's game instead of my wedding. The reactions were mixed, some looked at me with pity, others with disbelief, but one look stood out, my grandfather's. His face tightened, and I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. However, he didn't say anything at the time, and the rest of the day continued without incident. After the wedding, Lucas and I left for our honeymoon, eager to escape from everything and everyone for a while. We made a conscious decision to disconnect completely by staying phone-free throughout the trip. It was blissful, just the two of us exploring new places, enjoying each other's company, and reveling in the joy of being newlyweds. But when we returned home, the peaceful bubble we had created was abruptly shattered. As soon as I turned my phone back on, it was inundated with notifications. The sheer volume was overwhelming. I couldn't even unlock my phone before the barrage of messages started pouring in. Most of these messages were from my mother and brother, and they were far from pleasant. My brother had called me every name in the book, hurling insults that cut deep. My mother wasn't much better, her messages were filled with anger and bitterness. I quickly realized what had triggered this onslaught. One of my paternal aunts had posted photos of the wedding on Facebook. She had captioned the photos with a pointed comment aimed squarely at my parents, particularly my mother, for missing such an important event in my life. The post went viral within our community, and the backlash against my parents was swift and harsh. People were outraged on my behalf, publicly shaming my parents for their neglect. My grandfather, who had always been a figure of respect and authority in our family, decided to take matters into his own hands. He personally visited my parents, and from what I've heard, he didn't hold back. He unleashed years of pent-up frustration and disappointment, especially towards my father. The confrontation was intense, my father was reduced to tears by the end of it. This seemed to be a turning point for him. For the first time in my life, my father finally stood up to my mother. He was devastated by the realization that he had missed his only daughter's wedding, and even more so by the shame of facing his own father's disapproval. In a moment of desperation, he threatened to divorce my mother unless she made things right with me. This revelation hit me hard. My father's regret was palpable, but I couldn't ignore the years of hurt that had led us to this point. Meanwhile, my mother's messages began to change in tone. What started as angry and accusatory texts soon turned into desperate pleas for forgiveness. She was practically begging me to talk to her, to let her explain, to give her a chance to make things right. It was clear that she was panicking, and I wasn't sure if it was out of genuine regret or simply because she feared the social consequences. Now, I'm at home with Lucas, trying to figure out how to move forward. The whole situation feels surreal. My relatives, even those who weren't invited to the wedding, have been reaching out to me, apologizing for what I went through and insisting that they had no idea this was happening in our family. I believe them. Most of them live far away, either with my grandfather on the other side of the country or in different states altogether. They weren't around to see the dynamics in our household up close. However, not everyone has been supportive. My mother's sisters and a few of her close friends have been criticizing me, accusing me of being cruel for not telling my mother about the wedding. They say she's inconsolable, devastated by the thought of having missed such an important event in my life. But I can't help but feel that this is just another way for her to save face, to avoid taking responsibility for her actions. I'm torn between anger and guilt, unsure of what to believe or how to respond. The most recent messages from my parents have only added to my confusion. My father's texts are filled with regret and sorrow, while my mother's are a mix of anger, desperation, and self-pity. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to confront them, to finally let out all the emotions I've been holding back for so long. But another part of me just wants to move on, to leave the past behind and focus on my new life with Lucas. For now, I'm just taking it one day at a time, trying to figure out the best way to navigate this complicated, painful situation. I am profoundly saddened and deeply hurt that my mother missed my wedding, an event that should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Now, my family is fractured, divided into 3 distinct factions. The majority of my relatives are standing by my side, offering their unwavering support and understanding in what has become a very difficult situation. They recognize the pain I've gone through and believe I made the right decision in moving forward with my life, even if it means distancing myself from those who have repeatedly hurt me. However, not everyone in my family feels this way. My maternal aunts, who have always been close to my mother, are shaming me for supposedly hurting her feelings. They believe I'm to blame for the rift between us, arguing that I should have done more to include her, even though she chose not to attend. They seem to overlook the years of neglect and emotional pain I've endured, focusing only on my mother's feelings and ignoring mine entirely. Then, there are my maternal grandparents. They are firmly convinced that I should forgive my mother, urging me to overlook her absence at the wedding in light of her attempts to make amends. They see her efforts to reach out afterward as sincere and believe that, as her child, it's my duty to accept her apologies and reconcile, regardless of the past. On the other hand, my closest friends, those who have been with me through thick and thin, are telling me not to listen to the guilt tripping from my aunts and grandparents. They know the full extent of what I've been through and are adamant that I don't owe anyone forgiveness if it comes at the cost of my well-being. They've been my rock, reminding me that it's okay to put myself first for once, even if it means going against family expectations. So, Reddit, am I the one who's in the wrong here? Edit asterisk I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for the overwhelming amount of feedback and support I've received. It's been truly comforting, and I'm deeply touched by all the responses. Given how many questions have come up, I'll try to address the most common ones here. 1. Notification of the wedding asterisk I did inform my parents about my wedding well in advance. I followed traditional etiquette, sending out paper invitations to all my guests, including my parents. I received confirmation that all the invitations had reached their intended recipients. However, I never got a response from my parents, a few distant relatives, and some people on Lucas's side of the family. Concerned, I reached out to those who hadn't responded, sending them messages to double-check if they had received the invitation and to confirm their attendance. The few who hadn't replied told me they couldn't come for various reasons. But when I asked my parents and brother via text, they completely ignored me. I was left on read. Knowing how they operate and with so much else to plan for the wedding, I didn't see the point in pushing the matter further. Their silence was their answer. 2. Repeating the wedding date asterisk I didn't feel the need to keep reminding them of the wedding date because I had already been informed that my brother had a sports game that day, which they clearly prioritized over my wedding. Every time I tried to emphasize how important my wedding was to me, hoping for some acknowledgement, I was met with indifference. They told me it wasn't a big deal, that I shouldn't be so sensitive, and that I was overreacting by expecting them to care as much as I did. I was repeatedly told that other things, particularly my brother's activities, were simply more important than me and my wedding. By this point, I felt it was reasonable to stop insisting. Why should I continue to fight for attention and care from people who made it clear that I wasn't a priority? It wasn't worth the emotional effort anymore. 3. Keeping the wedding a secret asterisk some might think I kept my wedding a secret, but that's not the case. I made a conscious decision not to explicitly tell my parents that it was my wedding day to see if they would show any interest at all. Sadly, they didn't. I wanted to see if they would ask about the details or express any excitement, but there was nothing. Despite this, I was open about my wedding plans with my aunts and uncles. I frequently discussed my plans, like choosing a venue or shopping for my dress, in their presence. My mother was often in the room during these conversations. Sometimes she was distracted, on the phone or chatting with others, but other times she was just disinterested. Even when I talked about significant details of the wedding, she barely acknowledged it, offering a brief, "That's great, dear," before changing the subject. It was as if my wedding didn't exist in her world. 4. Staying in contact *. I've kept in contact with my parents despite everything because, in the past, every attempt I made to distance myself from them was met with severe backlash. After each major milestone in my life, like my high school graduation, bachelor's degree, and master's degree, I tried to go no contact. Each of these milestones was a painful reminder that my parents couldn't be bothered to show up for me, always choosing to prioritize my brother's activities instead. But each time I tried to cut ties, I was shamed for it. My parents, my brother, and even my maternal aunts and grandparents would accuse me of being ungrateful and selfish, for turning my back on the family. The pressure and guilt they heaped on me were overwhelming, and without strong support, I felt too weak to stand my ground. The real turning point came when I met Lucas. We started dating shortly after my last attempt to go no contact. Having him by my side gave me the strength and confidence I needed to begin setting boundaries. Before Lucas, I felt isolated and vulnerable, with no one to stand up for me. Now, I have his support, and it has made a world of difference. But back then, I was alone in this fight. To make matters worse, all my paternal relatives live across the country, so they were unaware of how my parents treated me. Once, when I was 14, I tried to expose my parents' behavior to my paternal family. My aunts, uncles, and grandpa confronted my parents about it, and they pretended to be sorry. But when we got home, I was subjected to a brutal beating and intense gaslighting. They accused me of lying and manipulating my family, making me feel like I was the problem. After that incident, I continued to keep in touch with my paternal relatives, but I was too scared to admit the truth about the abuse I was enduring. That fear still lingers, haunting me to this day. The only person who knew the full extent was my grandpa, but he was always threatened with being cut off from me if he ever tried to intervene or help. 5. Living in a different city *. My parents and I don't live in the same city anymore. I moved to a city about an hour's drive from their small town. One of the reasons they don't know my new address is because, once, my brother tried to break into my apartment to steal some cash. When I confronted my mother about it, she defended him, saying that siblings are supposed to share their belongings and that it was no big deal. After that incident, I decided to move and make sure they wouldn't find out where I live. I needed to protect myself from further invasions of privacy and keep my life separate from their toxic influence. 6. Favoritism towards my brother *. My parents didn't buy my brother a car and a house before he even started high school, but they did spoil him with a car for his 16th birthday and a house near his college when he began his freshman year. It was clear they were willing to go to great lengths to support him, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, they lied to me about my college fund, telling me it was gone when in reality, they had set it aside to be used for my brother later on. They made it clear where their priorities lay, keeping my funds stored away for his benefit while leaving me to fend for myself. Discussion on non-participation rights. In situations involving invitations, it's customary for recipients to respond appropriately and respectfully. Personally, whenever I receive an invitation, I make a point to display it prominently on my refrigerator as a constant reminder to acknowledge it. This is not only a practical way to remember the event but also a demonstration of respect towards the person who extended the invitation. In this case, the parents involved have not only neglected this basic courtesy, but they also seem to be oblivious to the consequences of their actions. As a result, I believe they deserve any fallout that comes from their lack of engagement and accountability. Opie, the individual in question, needs to be honest with their sisters about the realities of the situation. It appears that their mother is manipulating the narrative to make it seem as though their daughter has deliberately excluded them, which is an unfair portrayal of events. It's rather audacious for the parents to assume that the sisters even opened the invitation once they saw Opie's name on it. This raises the question of whether they were even willing to engage with Opie at all. Reflecting on this situation, I find it impressive that Nodal has pointed out this aspect. It really makes perfect sense, and I commend them for their insight. If I were in Opie's position, I would feel compelled to be quite petty and consider cutting off all contact with both my parents and my mother's side of the family. I would want them to experience the same feelings of neglect and exclusion that they have so carelessly imposed on others. Congratulations are in order for Opie and Lucas. I hope they find endless happiness together. However, the mother's situation raises a crucial question: what kind of atonement can she possibly offer now? Unless she possesses some kind of time travel ability to go back and attend significant milestones in Opie's life, like their wedding and graduations, there's simply no real way to make amends for the emotional damage caused. Thus, I would strongly advocate for a complete no-contact approach with the entire family. They do not contribute positively to Opie's life, and it would be healthier to remove that toxic influence. Additionally, it's essential for Opie to inform relatives about what happened to their college fund. This is a significant issue that should not be swept under the rug. Some mistakes are irreversible, and this situation clearly falls into that category. You cannot undo decades of neglect during someone's formative years. I would take the advice mentioned earlier and pursue a no-contact policy because Opie's parents clearly do not add any value to their life. It's also important to ensure that family members understand what transpired regarding the college fund. Opie doesn't need these individuals in their life anymore, especially when they have never been trusted to act in Opie's best interest. If Opie's parents feel embarrassed about the situation, they only have themselves to blame. This was not merely a singular mistake, it was a culmination of poor choices made over many years. Thankfully, Opie has support from their grandfather, and now that their paternal aunts are aware of the situation, they might step in to offer support as well. Most importantly, Opie has a loving partner in Lucas, who can provide emotional stability during this tumultuous time. To be honest, I cannot comprehend why anyone would choose to maintain contact with such neglectful parents. It's imperative for Opie to draw the line and move forward without the burden of their toxic presence. After all this time, what could possibly change? What would prompt their parents to act differently? Any children the parents may have in the future are likely to experience the same disregard and treatment. The parents have had ample opportunity to apologize and make amends, yet they chose to remain silent. This lack of action is even more telling. It indicates a deeper awareness of their wrongdoings, yet they continue to sit idly by, allowing the damage to persist. Next story, am I the a-hole for uninviting my sister from our wedding? As my wedding date approaches next weekend, I find myself facing a challenging situation regarding my sister's involvement. My fiancée has made a conscious choice not to inform her biological parents about our engagement or any details regarding the wedding. While it's true that her biological parents haven't necessarily done anything wrong per se, my fiancée simply does not view them as her family. In fact, discussing them makes her very uncomfortable. A couple of years ago, her birth mother attempted to reach out to me and other family members on Facebook. Unfortunately, one of those messages found its way to my sister, who then felt compelled to interfere because she sympathized with my fiancé's biological mother. As a consequence of this interference, I decided to limit my contact with my sister. Initially, she was invited to our wedding, primarily because my mother insisted on it. However, we recently discovered that my sister had shared our wedding invitation and website details with my fiancé's biological father. This resulted in her biological parents purchasing a gift from our registry and sending a note to our home, which completely undermines our boundaries. My sister's rationale for her actions was that we never explicitly told her she couldn't share that information and that there was nothing wrong with her sending a gift. To me, this is a blatant violation of common sense, especially considering that she is well aware of the reasons why we have distanced ourselves from her. Therefore, I took the step of informing her that she is no longer welcome to attend our wedding. This decision has left my mother distraught, as she is convinced that I will regret this choice in the future. My sister has argued that she has already made significant investments in preparations for the wedding, including expenses for shoes, hair, makeup appointments, and hotel accommodations. In my opinion, if my sister genuinely cared about attending, she would have thought through the consequences of her actions more carefully. Compounding the stress of the situation, my fiancé has started to feel overwhelmed due to my mother's emotional phone calls. I've firmly maintained my stance, stating that even if my fiancé is okay with my sister attending, I am not. Family should not treat each other in such a careless manner. To clarify, I did make it clear that my brother-in-law and nieces are still invited because I don't want them to miss out on the celebration, especially since all their cousins will be there. Edited to add, I realize that I may not have made this clear initially, but my fiancé was adopted when she was just a few months old. Her adoptive parents are the individuals she considers her real parents, and they play an active and significant role in her life as well as in the planning of our wedding. This distinction is crucial, as it emphasizes that her biological parents are not the ones she looks to for support or guidance. Not the a-hole opinion. It seems that many commenters have missed a critical aspect of this situation. According to Opie's post, the individuals referred to as her biological parents only attempted to reach out 2 years ago. She has no real relationship with them, and her feelings about the situation are completely valid. I would be furious if I were in Opie's shoes, particularly given the betrayal exhibited by her sister. The sister was aware of the lack of contact and the nature of Opie's relationship with her biological parents, yet she still chose to share that information, disregarding the emotional boundaries that had been established. From my own experience, I met my biological mother and half-brother in late 2020, and it became abundantly clear that they do not hold any familial significance for me. I attempted to forge a relationship with them, but sometimes, despite our best efforts, certain connections simply aren't meant to flourish. In light of this, I would be understandably furious with my sister for her reckless actions. Opie needs to be direct with her sister, making it clear that by inviting individuals who were not meant to be part of the event, she has forced us to consider security measures to ensure our wedding is protected. The behavior displayed by my sister is shockingly inappropriate, especially when one considers the sacred nature of a wedding ceremony. I would want my sister to understand that her actions have put my future parents-in-law in an uncomfortable situation. If my sister genuinely apologizes and demonstrates that she understands the gravity of her mistake, I might consider allowing her to attend the wedding. However, if she reacts defensively or fails to grasp the seriousness of her behavior, I will maintain my decision to keep her out. Regardless of the circumstances, my nieces will not attend if their mother is not welcomed. Luckily, we already arranged for security, as the venue requires it when serving alcohol, but I still worry about the possibility of uninvited guests attempting to crash the event. Ultimately, I don't believe my sister would go so far as to show up uninvited, as that wouldn't align with her narrative of being the victim in this situation. However, I can anticipate that she will take to social media to express her discontent if things do not go her way. In the situation I'm facing, I'm left questioning whether I'm in the wrong for my refusal to help my sister with her wedding planning after she chose not to include me as a bridesmaid. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and my younger sister, Lucy, who is 25, is preparing for her wedding in a few months. Our relationship has always been close and supportive, so I was genuinely shocked when I discovered that she had selected her friends to be her bridesmaids while omitting me entirely from this important role. When I approached Lucy to discuss her decision, I expected an open conversation, but her response took me by surprise. She explained that she wanted a small bridal party and preferred to include friends who have a long-standing relationship with her fiancé. While I understood her desire for a close-knit group, I couldn't help but feel hurt and sidelined by her choice. Despite my disappointment, I attempted to respect her decision and maintain a supportive attitude. As the wedding date drew nearer, I noticed that Lucy was becoming increasingly overwhelmed with the numerous tasks involved in planning her wedding. She began reaching out to me more frequently, asking for help with various aspects, from organizing her bachelorette party to creating DIY decorations. In the beginning, I was happy to lend a hand and contributed to her efforts here and there. However, as time went on, Lucy's requests escalated. She began asking me to take on more significant responsibilities that would require substantial time and effort. This is where I felt a shift. I communicated to Lucy that while I wanted to help her, I couldn't commit to the level of involvement she was requesting, particularly given that I wasn't included as a bridesmaid. My refusal to take on these additional tasks stemmed from the emotional impact of her initial decision. I felt that if she valued my support as a sister, she wouldn't have excluded me from such an important role in her life. Lucy's reaction was immediate and emotional. She became visibly upset and accused me of being petty and unsupportive. This accusation hurt deeply, especially since I had tried to be there for her in the capacity that I felt comfortable. To complicate matters further, our parents entered the fray, pressuring me to prioritize family obligations and assist Lucy with her wedding plans. They argued that family should come first, which left me feeling even more conflicted about my stance. From the feedback I've received, many people have pointed out that the tasks Lucy is asking me to help with are typically the responsibilities of bridesmaids. If she chose to limit her bridal party to a small group of friends, it would be reasonable to expect those friends to step up and fulfill those roles. Commenters have suggested that it's unfair for Lucy to expect me to shoulder these responsibilities while simultaneously excluding me from being a bridesmaid. The overarching sentiment among those weighing in is that my sister's decision to leave me out of the bridal party does not create an obligation for me to participate in wedding planning. Many argue that it is unreasonable for Lucy to snub me in one aspect of her wedding while demanding my time and effort in another. Furthermore, the question arises about the nature of family obligations. If our parents are advocating for family support, why didn't they encourage Lucy to include me in the bridal party to begin with? Some commenters have also speculated about Lucy's motivations, suggesting that she may view me as a convenient resource for free help rather than genuinely valuing my support as her sister. If she has chosen to surround herself with friends as her bridal party, it stands to reason that those friends should also be responsible for assisting her in the planning process. Ultimately, I have come to the conclusion that I am not in the wrong for my decision to refrain from helping Lucy with her wedding planning. I believe it is important to uphold my boundaries, especially given the context of her exclusion. While I want to maintain a loving and supportive relationship with my sister, I also recognize the importance of standing firm in my feelings about being overlooked for such an important role in her life. In light of these factors, I feel justified in my choice to prioritize my own emotional well-being while navigating this challenging situation.